We got batter up. That's what happened.
How do you do that again?
There you go, batter up. Play ball.
Use your outside voice.
Good evening. My name is Yate. I'm one of your volunteers. And I'll introduce our first speaker, who will give us a little warm-up.
Your mini speaker.
Mini speaker? Okay. First of all, I'd like to ask who has not been here before?
Wow.
How is that possible?
We all found it. I know. It's on Google.
We've been here for 20 years. But welcome anyway. Tonight we have a very, very good program with Jim Tolstrup talking about the Lakota Star Knowledge. Very, very good stuff. A lot of wisdom in there. We have a Lakota Star Wall, so we will refer to that Star Wall. We have some handouts in the back that Carol is handing out, so if you want to read up on it, you can do that. Observatory has been here now for about 20 years, and right now we're counting just past 77,000 visitors over 20 years for Little Bertha, and about 70% is K through 12, so not too many of you qualify. That is our target audience. We like to get the kids involved. We don't like to be nerdy astronomers. We're probably a little geeky, but not nerdy. If we were nerdy, we would be on top of a mountain away from town, and you would never find us, right? It's even hard to find us here in the dark, right? Anyway, tonight, unfortunately, the clouds are getting thicker and thicker. So,
So are the UFOs.
The UFOs, yes.
Yeah, they're getting thicker.
Yeah, we still don't know what it is. We think it's balloons with a little LED light hanging underneath them. But since John told me that this cloud deck, the lower cloud deck, was at 10,000 feet altitude, these things are about 10,000 feet because they're right now in the cloud.
They have to be pretty big.
Yeah, probably. And somebody put some real serious money into that. I mean, just to lose them basically because they're just drifting off to the east. So hopefully somebody will post something on one of the websites and maybe the community page here in Berthoud, and maybe we'll know.
It was festive. Yeah, very Christmassy.
It was special, right?
Yeah, very
It was
special.
just special. We always say Berthoud is the center of the universe. Right? Anyway, hopefully we can still look through some telescopes. We have some great telescopes, a big 24-inch that was used for the Apollo program in the early 1960s. Picked the landing spots for Apollo and figured out that it was safe to land on the moon. And then we have a triplet of telescopes in the other dome, an 18-inch, 6-inch, solar telescope. Hopefully, well, the forecast is not like that. So.
Did you guys, you said you have solar telescope?
Yeah.
Did you watch Mercury?
Oh, actually, we got flat.
You guys did with school, right?
I was here. We had about 60 of the high school.
60 kids. Okay.
Cool.
In groups of 20 or so.
It's highly overrated, I think. It's like watching grass grow or paint dry. I mean, it takes 4 hours for that little dot to go across the surface of the moon or the sun.
But it doesn't happen.
But you can say you saw it, right? Several years ago, we did a Venus transit, and that was much easier to see because Venus makes a much bigger shadow. Mercury is so small. But I didn't see it. But apparently the school came, the science teacher in the school, Mr. Kint, he came with the class, all the science classes. So that's good to know. That adds to our statistics. So maybe we'll be at 78,000 visitors pretty soon. Anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to John, one of our very active volunteers. You can introduce the rest of your illustrious career yourself.
My observatory was frozen shut because we had the freezing rain in Longmont, and I couldn't get the dome open.
Really?
Yeah, it was just encrusted with ice. So.
You know, a little bit of silicone.
Silicon? Okay, I need to borrow a can. So. All right, so yeah, I run the Cherrywood Observatory, Backyard Observatory down in Longmont, and teach all over the place and work with NASA Science Mission Director doing education out there. And I've been doing warm-up talks for our speakers. I just news events in astronomy each month. And we're going to start with the meteor outburst expected in what's called the Alpha Monoceroids. Mono is 1. This is the constellation of the unicorn. So that's why it said unicorns breathing in space. So part 1 is talking about this outburst that might happen. The Alpha Monoceroid shower is coming up November 21st to 22nd, so this is really soon. And the reason we see showers of meteors at all is that comets go round and round and round around the sun. And they drop debris out the back, little grains of sand, specks of dust. And when the Earth goes through that orbit, when the comet's not nearby, we still get the little grains of sand and specks of dust that burn up in the atmosphere. They're moving very, very rapidly. And they burn up due to friction, give a brief flash of light. This is happening tens, if not 100 miles up over your head, 50 miles over your head. You're not in danger of being bonked in the head by one of these. This is very minimal shower normally. Normally you get 4 an hour. It means you got to sit out there in your lawn chair all bundled up with hot cocoa and wait. But we have an outburst expected. We might see up to 400 meteors per hour. That's 6 to 7 a minute. So that's getting to be, that's pretty nice. That's a good rate. We've seen outbursts before, 1925, 1935. There were over 1,000, best we can tell. We don't really know how high. People weren't as systematic about counting them. In 85, we had 700 an hour. In 1995, we had 400 an hour. We don't know which comet or what body created this stream, but it's there. So here's a view at 11:50 p.m. In 1985, the comet seemed to come from here. In 1995, they seemed to come from here. It's drifting a little bit through space. The name of these meteor showers is based on the constellation. Here's Monoceros right here. It's right behind Orion. This is where the unicorn is. It's a very dim constellation most people don't know anything about. And it seems to kind of come close to the brightest star in the constellation, Alpha. Alpha, Beta, Gamma, first 3 bright stars in most constellations. So that's it. That's the mystery of the naming of that. So this peak will happen about 4:50 in the morning Universal Time, which translates to 9:50 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That is before that part of the sky rises by about an hour, hour and a half. So these little guys are going to seem to be coming up off the horizon and zipping overhead. You don't have to see the exact center of the origin of these meteors to get the show. So it rises a little after 10 p.m. Be very low in the eastern horizon, but they all seem to radiate away from this point. It's the same phenomenon you get if you get on railroad tracks and look at the tracks going off in the distance, and they seem to meet at a point way far away. So these are all coming in parallel, but from our perspective, they seem to be spreading away from that single point in the sky. We don't have a moon to worry about. It won't be up till much later at night. So the secret to seeing this is A, getting a clear night, very dark, clear eastern horizon, and overall a dark location. No street lights or building lights shining in your eyes. I recommend a lawn chair, blankets, warm coats, maybe extra socks, because you're just going to sit there for half hour and wait. You're not moving around. You don't need a telescope. You don't need binoculars. You don't need anything but your eyes to see these. If you really get ambitious, you can take a digital camera out, sit open for 5 minutes at a time, and just kind of point it a little bit up in the sky and see if you catch some things for fun. But that's it. The peak will only last about 15 to maybe as much as 40 minutes. So you got to be there at the right time to catch it. Get out there maybe 9:15 or so and just kind of be prepared to be there through 10:30 or 10:45 to bracket it, because predicting these outbursts is not a great exact science. They kind of piece together where these things are. So hopefully it's clear. Hopefully you get to see some meteors that night.
One suggestion
Yeah.
as to how to find this part of the sky. If you know how Orion looks like, right? Like a bow tie figure. If you take the belt of Orion and you go to the left, basically down to the brightest star in the sky, Sirius. And then halfway between the belt and Sirius, that's where Monoceros is basically.
That's
So
the T-shirt.
That's how you find it. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I was prepared. All right, and then, yeah, I have a T-shirt for every constellation you could ever imagine. No, I don't. Then a quickie here, Mars has gas. Its atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, 2.6% nitrogen, about 2% argon, just a little bit of oxygen from things breaking apart in the atmosphere, and 0.06 carbon monoxide. NASA's Curiosity rover has been studying the air around Gale Crater for 6 years now, so we've got a pretty good window here, good baseline of data. On the laser just stopped. And it's seen things we expected, like it's cold enough on Mars for carbon dioxide to freeze into a solid. So the atmosphere itself, most of the atmosphere is that, freezes out and snows down onto the poles. What's our name for solid carbon dioxide? You might have had it used at dry ice at Halloween. Stick it in your punch and spooky. So you got a big spooky planet. And what they've seen, though, is oxygen is rising in the hemisphere in the spring and summer. And it doesn't drop in the summer like the carbon dioxide does. They wonder whether ultraviolet light from the sun might be breaking apart water vapor in the air and releasing the oxygen. But when you do the calculations, you'd need about 5 times more water vapor than exists. We have also seen methane increasing in the spring and into the summer months. And both of these things could be biosignatures. They could be signs of microbial life waking up and going, eating some stuff in the soil and doing what they do here, burping out oxygen and burping out methane. So other things we've looked at, we know there's hydrogen peroxide and perchlorates with some really crazy chemical symbols there that with ultraviolet light and things like that hitting the soil, you might get oxygen there and oxygen there broken out, but it just doesn't work. There's not enough of it there. It would probably take centuries, if not 1,000 years, to build up as much as the oxygen and methane we see released each season. So this is a mystery. We're still under investigation to see what might be causing this. There certainly could be normal geochemical reasons that have nothing to do with life at all that can cause this. They've actually put a call out to the scientific community and anybody to see if you have ideas of where the oxygen and methane could be coming from. So that's it. 2 updates for this month. And there's no connection between life on Mars and the lights up in the sky.
And if you enjoy learning astronomy like this, John offers a training program for observatory volunteers here, and we can always use extra volunteers. We don't need any background in astronomy, just the ability to help herd kids or to help out with
What's that?
observatory maintenance.
I wouldn't mind.
Or if you would like to learn how to run our big telescopes, we offer training in that as well. So we could not run the observatory. It's a nonprofit organization, and even though we're on the grounds of Berthoud High School, we don't receive direct funding from the school district to run the observatory. We're a separate nonprofit. So
As far as that, maybe just start it at the beginning again.
I'm going to ask all the volunteers to
So it
stand
won't
up
run out.
and wave and-
Oh, we just wait.
So if any of you are interested in volunteering, just look for somebody wearing one of the LTO tags. And if you have more money than time, we are always happy to get money as well. There's a donation box in the back.
It's
And-
got one lonely little dog going,
Yeah.
needs company. George is crying. He could use some of his brothers and sisters too, 5, 10s, and 20s.
Yeah. So we always are grateful for that to help keep the observatory running here. since most of the programs that we do host are school groups and kids, you know, they don't always have money to donate, so it's gratefully appreciated. And then every third Friday, we have our Star Night that we have this evening. And tonight it's an extra special presentation. We have Jim Tolstrup, and Jim and I have worked together for about a decade. We developed the astronomy program up at the Shambhala Mountain Center in Red Feather, and so we've been team teaching. And Jim has wonderful roots and connections with the Lakota Native Americans and helped bring about our Lakota Star Wall. So we have one wall with the Greek constellations, which are what most people learn about in school, but every culture has always had their own stories of the night sky, their own view of the stars and the constellations. And this one, oh, thank you for adjusting the lights there, ties in with the Native American groups who have originated from this area, and so it seemed especially fitting to tie in with them, and also they have a very rich tradition of astronomy. So Jim is going to tell us a bit of that tradition, and also it marks, we're very close to the 8th anniversary of when we completed the Star Wall and had one of the most special evenings I think we've ever had at the observatory, when we had a lot of the Lakota elders here and a drum circle, and we dedicated the Lakota Wall. So thank you so much for bringing this to us, and we're looking forward to your presentation about the wall. And Jim is also the director of the High Plains Environmental Center in Loveland, so we're happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. My ancestry is Celtic and Scandinavian. And when I was about 12 years old, I read the book Black Elk Speaks. Has anybody read that? Quite a few heads nodding here. That had such an impact on me. And my father used to smoke Lucky Strike cigarettes. And I would take his cigarettes, go to the one hill that didn't have houses on it, and I would offer that tobacco to the 4 directions and leave it there. And I didn't talk a lot when I was a kid. They would have probably put me in an institution if I had told people what I was thinking, but I always thought, I want to graduate high school, go to South Dakota and meet a medicine man. And I graduated in May of 1977. A week later, I took a Greyhound bus to Rapid City, South Dakota, and I met a lot of really old-time elders there. I think intuitively I knew that I came from a culture where you graduate from school, you graduate from college, get married or things like that, but there weren't a lot of rituals, there weren't a lot of rites of passage. I think there's a lot of people in our society who are getting older, but they wonder, am I a grown-up? Am I a man? And where do you learn that from? Or how do you cross that threshold? So sort of amazed actually when I think about the kid that I was and how determined I was to find that. And I met a lot of these people. Some of these men were quite old when I met them, in their 80s or 90s. Some of them are people that I met later. Quite a few of these are medicine men. I gave a talk about the uses of plants by the Lakota in a university setting. And afterwards, a young woman said, like, weren't there any women? Didn't you meet any female elders there? But these were very, very traditional people. And there's a way that young men learn from older men and young women learn from older women. There certainly is women's wisdom in traditional cultures and in the Lakota culture. But a lot of these are people who taught me. Maybe I just met them briefly or spent a lot of time with them, but I learned something from each one of them. And I learned to listen, because in these traditional cultures, they may only say this once, and so you really have to pay attention. It's an oral transmission. It's a culture where people, for centuries, people never wrote things down. And this Lakota Star Knowledge only recently has been written down in a book, and people were amazed to see, like, this wisdom has been there. No one knew, even among the Lakota, a lot of people didn't know that this tradition existed. And it is partly because the Lakota elders felt like the world needs to know about this. And I want to explore a little bit why, what the understandings here that could help us in the predicament that we find ourselves in the world today. I didn't expect that to happen. So this person in particular is very important to me. And I want to say also, my interest in this is not scientific particularly, although there is science in this presentation, and is not academic. It is mostly of a spiritual nature, but also it's relational. Because this is Sam Moves Camp. He's my brother. He's a medicine man. He adopted me as part of his family. And the last time I gave this talk, Sam was sitting right here in this front row. And that was certainly an experience. Actually, 8 years ago when I gave this talk, it wasn't I who was supposed to give the talk. It was someone else who was going to come from St. College. And he didn't make it here in time. So Sam's like, well, you're going to have to do it. And then I gave this presentation. I was pretty nervous about it. And afterwards I said to Sam, do you want to say something? He came up here and he just took the microphone and he said, my brother did a good job. So as part of this connection, and I do feel it's really important, we can benefit from other cultures in the world, and it's important to not just like go and get what we can get and learn what we can learn and take that away, but form a relationship, form a bond with people. And if you have this kind of relationship with people, the Oglala Lakota County is one of the poorest counties in the United States. So if you have a connection with people here, you will get calls at midnight. Hey bro, I got no gas and I'm out in Kadoka and whatever. I mean, it's like, this is just part of how it is. People need your help. And so we formed a nonprofit, and we helped to buy a modular home for Sam and his family. We've helped various elders at different times, helped to rebuild Orville Looking Horse's engine for his vehicle and so on. So this is something that we've tried to offer something back for what's been given to us. And this is Orville Looking Horse in this picture. Orville is the keeper of the sacred pipe, a sacred artifact that goes back many, many generations. And he's gone around trying to raise awareness in the world of June 21st as a World Day of Peace and Prayer. And for that, he won an award from the United Nations, the Juliet Hollister World Peace Temple of Understanding Award. And he's worked a lot to protect sacred sites. So we're going to talk about places in the Black Hills that are considered sacred sites and how they relate to stars that we see in the sky with the phrase, what happens in in the sky is reflected on the earth. What happens on the earth is in the sky. So 150 years ago, all of these sites were within Lakota territory. And if things had been different, we might have to have a passport to go to the Black Hills, and because we would be entering another country. Nowadays, anyone can go there and do whatever they want. But it's sort of like having a flea market in the Sistine Chapel, or because this is the sacred center of the universe for some people. So this is Bear Butte over here on the slide on the right there. Bear Butte is a sacred place for a lot of Plains tribes. And right below it is Sturgis, South Dakota, where thousands and thousands of bikers go in the summertime. And there's someone who wanted to build like a concert place with a bar and concert, and have like a lot of loud music and so on. And people were fighting against that, because this is a place where people go to pray and on vision quests and so on. And Orville actually went to the bikers and talked to them about it, and a lot of them said, we're with you, and we wouldn't go to that place even if they do build it. So there's some understanding is being worked out here of what is appropriate and tolerating each other and our different kind of views of the world. But when I go to the Black Hills, I crave the silence of the hills. I don't necessarily crave lots of loud noises. But there is something in this place. I've spent a lot of time in South Dakota in the Black Hills in my life, and there's something you can feel there that it's palpable and it's deep, and it feels very powerful and enriching. And so we're going to talk about some of those places. I also want to talk about the High Plains Environmental Center. We have a relationship with the Lakota, and like this place, the Little Thompson Observatory, we host this Lakota ride that begins in Sedalia and goes to Pine Ridge. And they call it a, trying to think of the word, a reconciliation, and means like getting the predominant white culture and the Native American culture together to understand each other and understand our values, and kind of share food and share our culture and so on. So we host this at High Plains Environmental Center. We also have a garden that teaches about plants that as used by Plains Indian tribes. So the High Plains is an area that when Lewis and Clark passed through this in the early 1800s, they said that this is a place that would never be suitable for human habitation. Denver, Cheyenne, like those would never be viable in a place like this. Basically described it as a desert. But it is an incredibly rich and vast environment, and unfortunately, one of the most degraded biomes in North America, because it doesn't hold up well to cultivation, and only a tiny fraction of the High Plains is actually still intact with the native plants and etc. So there's been a huge decline. There were approximately 20 million Native Americans in North America. And in the 20th century, the number 2 million was pretty consistent. Slowly, the Native American population is growing, but it's still quite low. There were approximately 30 million bison, and in the 20th century, that rose to about 500,000. And they're estimated to have been around 5 billion black-tailed prairie dogs, and now probably less than 25 million. And sadly, most of them that you see are hemmed into reservations like Native Americans, where they can't really escape from small urban lots. So the original instructions, this is something that a lot of indigenous people around the world talk about. Native Americans use this phrase a lot. The original instructions from their creator, how to live on the earth, how to relate to other beings, the water, animals. And it's encoded in the language. There's been a lot of studies among Australian Aboriginals and Pacific Islanders and various native people that when their language declines, the environment declines at the same time, because there are ways of beings that are encoded in the language. So a lot of, in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the words, the language that was of this land. And actually, where we are right here was part of the Lakota territory in the 1850s by treaty. So this actually isn't something that's only in South Dakota, but was part of where we are right here. So this I'm going to read. Even the rocks which seem to lie dumb as they swelter in the sun along the silent shore in solemn grandeur thrill with the memories of past events connected with the fate of my people. The very dust under our feet responds more lovingly to our footsteps than to yours, because it is the ashes of our ancestors, and our bare feet are conscious of the sympathetic touch, for the soil is rich with the life of our kindred. Chief Seattle, 1854. What is on the sky is in the earth, and what is in the sky is on the earth. So this is what we call the winter circle. It's on the map here. And it is basically, actually on the next, this is a map of the Lakota constellations. Yeah, there we go. So it is, I have this. Capella, Aldebaran, Rigel, Sirius, Procyon or Procyon, Pollux, and Castor is commonly called the winter circle in European astronomy and astrology. It's called that. And this is thought of as this by the Lakota. So the winter circle is a map of the Black Hills. So there's a lot of stories connected with this. And in the past, there have been what are called the 4 scoldings of Maka. So human beings have become arrogant, they've been greedy, and they have degraded the environment. And in order to, well, as a result of that, there was great environmental calamity. And some beings they call the Wakinyan or Yate, they live between the sky and the earth. They helped human beings in the past. And in the most recent time, the world was destroyed by flood. And all over the world we have this story. You know, it's in the Bible. The world was destroyed, all the people were destroyed by a flood. So the Lakota have this story. And at the end of the flood, there were only a few human beings left alive. And the 4-legged animals said, like, this is our opportunity to get rid of people. They hunt us, they kill us, and they're a pain in the neck. We should just get rid of them now. And the birds felt some sympathy with human beings, because they have 2 legs, and we have 2 legs, so maybe we're more closely related. And so the birds argued that human beings should be allowed to survive. So the animals all together decided, we're going to have a race around the Black Hills, and whoever wins is going to decide the fate of human beings. So the buffalo is the most powerful, strongest animal. And he ran the fastest, he was easily beating the other animals. But the magpie is the most clever. And he hid in the buffalo's mane, and just when they got to the finish line, he flew over. So they say we owe our existence to the cleverness of this bird. And so that's called Changleshka Wakan, the sacred hoop. And it is the circle, I'm gonna keep holding on to this thing. It's the circle that we just talked about in the sky, the winter circle. Oh, I'm gonna go back one, and on Earth, it's this geological formation that basically makes a red track all around the Black Hills, called the racetrack. I'm not going to get deeply into this, but the Lakota calendar is based on the moons. Anybody who has looked at the Western calendar and lunar calendars knows that 365 days and 28-day cycles do not match up. So they counted the 28-day cycles. They're consistent. They're always the same. And they named them after basically phenological observation. So when ducks return, when it's so cold in the wintertime that the trees crack, when the leaves come off of the trees, when the grass first begins to grow, when chokecherries are black, these are the names of the months. And so the point that I'm making here is the Lakota people were keen observers of nature, and they watched the signs in the stars, they watched the changes in migration of animals and so on, and that's how they knew where to go and what to do at various times. I have done it again.
Jim, to update that a little bit, I mean, NASA is finally starting to listen to the Native Americans. Anybody follows their horoscope? Nobody wants to admit to the drama. There used to be 12 signs of the zodiac. NASA just added a 13th to be in sync with the lunar calendar.
And what is that called?
And the 13th sign is Ophiuchus.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, it is the healer, the serpent bearer.
And we're right near that now, right? It's like late November.
And of course, nobody has that sign.
But next time somebody asks me, what's your sign? I'm gonna blow their minds with yeah.
It is between Scorpius and Sagittarius.
So one of the things that if you're on the prairie in late March, you begin to notice signs that are hard to miss. And the beginning of the cycle, the beginning of the story that we're telling here is approximately around March 21st, which is when we say the sun enters Aries. And there's a picture of Fort Laramie there because the reason the Fort Laramie Treaty was at Fort Laramie in Wyoming, or why Fort Laramie was there, is on the North Platte River. And the North Platte River is a place where the Lakota would winter. There were a lot of cottonwood trees that had firewood. They would feed that cottonwood bark to ponies in the wintertime. And also there were a lot of south-facing hills that warmed up in the day, and plenty of water. So it was a winter camping grounds. And so that's where the story of this migration begins every year along the Platte River. At that time, has anyone been to Kearney, Nebraska, when the sandhill cranes begin to migrate through there? It is an incredible experience. 500,000 of these birds fly overhead, and once you hear their chortling cry, I mean, you'll always recognize it. There's nothing like it, and it's a thrilling sound. I can just only imagine after a long, cold winter of breathing wood smoke in the teepee and just trying to stay alive, hearing that sound and the earth waking up, and knowing that they're called the buffalo's friends because shortly thereafter, the buffalo herds begin to migrate as well. So these are the signs people would see when the spring was beginning. Another thing that people would see is what I was just describing, the sun entering Aries. And when we say that the sun is in Aries, it means that, I'm going to put this down for a second. So if this is the sun, and where it rises in the morning, and every night you see Aries is getting closer and closer, and then when the sun is in Aries, you actually don't see Aries because it's in the sun. So that looked like, well, actually, there's an association here. This plant, Cornus stolonifera, it's native, it grows here in Colorado along riverbanks, also called red willow. In Lakota, it's cha sha sha, which means a red stick, for obvious reasons. This was connected with, that's the constellation Aries was called cha sha sha, this plant. And this is what this bark was peeled and smoked in the sacred pipe. So to see the sun, are like coals of the fire, getting closer and closer to that red willow bark every evening until you don't see that red willow bark anymore, is like lighting the pipe, and it's the beginning of this cosmic ceremony. So the pipe is something that is most sacred to the Lakota, and it connects the earth and the sky through prayer. And it was brought by a supernatural being from the sky in the form of a shooting star. So in the old days when the Lakota saw a star coming down, they'd say, "Wokpe," and it means like shot down. So a sacred being, woman, came down to earth like a shooting star, and then she came in the form of a woman, brought the pipe to the Lakota. So this came from up there, came from a star. And I'm going to read this one because this is a direct quote by Ronald Goodman in the book Lakota Star Knowledge. The Lakota word for prayer is wachekia. Wachekia also means talking with relatives, or to express it another way, one of the intentions of prayer is to make relatives with the supernatural or the spiritual powers of the 6 directions, and also with plants and humans, stones and animals. For the Lakota to make relatives in this manner transforms a strange and otherwise dangerous world into a house of relatives where all interactions are founded on mutual respect. A Lakota can then look from the sun to the buffalo, from the stars to the cottonwood tree, and say truthfully and gratefully, "Mitakuye oyasin," all my relatives, these are my relatives. So there's this is the sciencey part. If you're spinning a top, it doesn't just spin on a level, but if you watch it or spin a coin or anything, you'll see that it develops a wobble. And the earth has a wobble like that. So there's a thing called the precession of the equinoxes, and it means that if you could watch the sky for 24,000 years, you would see all the constellations move backwards and back to their original position over 24,000 year period. So if you actually observed with your own eyes the sun entering Aquarius or Aries or the red willow bark constellation, that actual observation took place over 2,000 years ago. So it gives you a sense of how long you can date this tradition. And as Andrea has pointed out in our program at Shambhala Mountain Center, if you think you're an Aquarius, you're actually a Capricorn, because like all of these signs, if you were born in Aquarius, you were born in Aquarius 2,000 years ago, but in this period of time, it's actually Capricorn was the constellation at the time that you were born, because of everything is slipping back one whole constellation every 2,000 years. So what would happen then is when that period of time came and the coals of the fire or the sun lit the red willow bark or the Cansasalpusye constellation, the beginning of a ceremony, that's when elders and medicine people knew that it's time to go to certain places and perform ceremonies. And one of the first springtime ceremonies that happened in the Black Hills is called Iwakichipi, or Yate Iwakichipi, or Dancing for the Thunder. And this is something to this day I can say, I know of no other people that take such great delight in hearing thunder. In the springtime, even my Lakota friends will post on Facebook that they heard thunder and they're very excited about it, because it means the world is waking up. And so there's a great love for it. They say in the end of the summer, when the thunder's gone away, people talk about, we miss our friends up there, and then they're excited when they come back. This place, I can say, when I first went there, was called Harney Peak. Harney was an Indian killer, and that was kind of a disgrace for Lakota people. The original name is Hihankaga Paha, which means it's like where the owls come from, or where owls are born. And they wanted to change it back to that, and people generally agreed. No one knows what that means, and they don't know how to say it. So anyone who has read Black Elk Speaks knows that in the end of that book, Black Elk stood there with tears streaming down and holding his pipe and prayed, and I said, like, make my people live. And there was a little thunder in the sky, and it was a beautiful scene, beautifully written by John Neihart from a real experience that happened. And so for that reason, a lot of people thought it was a good idea to call this Black Elk Peak. So that place is connected with the Pleiades, which, interestingly enough, all around the world, people think that this is 7, and it's connected with girls. But you can't see 7 stars. I've never seen them. But there are 7 bright stars. You can't see them very well with your naked eye. But anybody drive a Subaru? Subaru, right? That's this constellation. And a lot of cultures call this like seven girls. So there's a story about a red eagle was up on that Black Elk Peak and would fly down to the village and would steal girls and away from the village. And then eventually he had stolen 7 girls from the village. And then this young man came along. His name's Fallen Star, and he collected the spirits of those girls and he put them up in the stars for safekeeping. This word, Wakinyan, is one word for children in Lakota language, and it means their minds are sacred. And Sam, my brother and teacher, says that, like, we never tell our kids do this or that. He says their minds are sacred, and we don't know where they're going to go. You know, you're trying to teach them things, but sometimes a child is born knowing something, or kids play the violin when they're 3 years old. They just have some innate gift, and so their minds are sacred, is what that means. But this connects with a story about there were 2 young women, teenagers really, and they were out digging prairie turnips. And after a while they got tired and they laid down and they were looking at the sky, and since they were teenagers, pretty much all they thought about were boys. And then after a little while, one star came out, and one of the girls said, if that star was a young man, I'd marry that one. And then another star came out, and then her friend said, I'd marry that one over there. And then they fell asleep. And they woke up, and there were these two, I'm hearing stuff over there. There were these two handsome, like beautifully dressed young men. And they said, like, well, we heard that you like us, so come and live with us up in our star world. And so these two young women went with these star men to live in the sky, and they were happy there. They became part of the star people, and they married these young star men, and then the two young women became pregnant, and they were told one thing must never do in the star world is to dig for prairie turnips. And then one of them one day just got this craving, like, I really want to have prairie turnips. And she went out to look for them. And she started digging around, made a little hole in the ground. And when she looked down in the hole, she could see her world down there. And suddenly she became really homesick for her family and for her parents and her village. And she wanted to get home. So when they dig the prairie turnips, they braid them in a long string, like the way braided garlic looks. And she lowered that string down, and even though it was pretty long, it seemed like it was still high above the world. But she decided to just chance it and climb down. And then when she got close to, she was still way above the tops of the trees, and she just said a little prayer and let go. And she fell to the earth, and the fall killed her, but her baby was born. And some old pair of meadowlarks were nearby, and they didn't have any children, so they adopted this boy. And because meadowlarks speak the Lakota language, he was able to learn the language, and because he was a supernatural being, he grew to a full-grown man in 7 days, and he was called Fallen Star. And he went around, like Sam said, he was like Jesus to the Indians. He cured people, he performed miracles, and so he features in a lot of these stories about the star knowledge. So this is something that was observed in written history. The Chinese wrote about this in 1054, the Crab Nebula, and where this showed up is connected with this place in the Black Hills. And that, there it is right there, in the center of the Black Hills. And so, if you have a map that looks like this is where all the important stuff is, and then something happens there that's a bright light, you're going to be very interested to find out what's happening in that part of the map. And so, that's this place which is called Peshla. I'm just going to go back one. So, this is the second of the springtime ceremonies, and it's when people would go there and they would pour out water as an offering to plants. They'd offer seeds for birds. They'd offer buffalo tongues for animals that ate meat. And so they made all these offerings, and it's called Okishlataya Wohuawata, peace at a bare spot. So at this place, they would, the Lakota call their way of life Lakowichoa, which is like peace with everything. And so that was expressed by making offerings to all forms of living things as part of these springtime ceremonies. Another thing that shows up in the winter circle is this thing that's called Tayamani. And one of the meanings of it is Wamakashka, and that is one way of describing animals. There's sometimes this phrase is used to mean animals. Literally it means Wamakashka, everything on earth that lives, or everything on earth that moves. So it kind of means all living things. But typically, you can see on the map down here, it's described as an animal. It also represents another story where the Lakota say that they themselves followed the buffalo out of a cave, often said to be wind cave, the cave that breathes, in the Black Hills. So the buffalo came out of the cave, and the Lakota came out following them. And so that this, in that context, in that story, this represents the buffalo coming out of the wind cave. Nape, this is a very important, even people who don't know constellations recognize this. It's basically Orion. The Lakotas call it Nape, the hand. And there's a story about a chief who was greedy and selfish. And the one thing, I've had Native people say to me before, like, we didn't have 10 commandments, we only had one. And that is like, share what you have with everyone. And so for a chief isn't supposed to be the wealthiest. A chief isn't supposed to have all the power, all the goods, and lord it over their enemies. The chief is the most humble person who gives all the material goods to make sure the people have what they need. And so this chief didn't do that. And in order to punish and scold him, the spirits took his arm away. And so that's the hand represents the arm. And if you're familiar with Orion, you see it in the wintertime, you see it in the spring, and then in the summertime it goes away. You don't see it anymore. Okay. That represents, there's a story that goes with that. And that is, Fallen Star went to a village, and there was a beautiful young woman, and he fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. And her father was the chief who lost his arm. And so he said, you can marry my daughter, but you have to go on a quest and return my lost arm to me. And he had to go through all this suffering in the Black Hills, and he was hungry, he was thirsty, and he was hot, and he suffered. He had to battle with an old ogre in the Black Hills. And then he brought the arm back. And that represents the suffering that sun dancers go through. They go through thirst, they go through hunger, they experience extreme heat and exhaustion. And that is to, in the springtime, the grass is green, the flowers are blooming, everything is beautiful. And then it gets harsh. If you've ever been on the prairie, the summer is very intense, and it gets dried up, and so it's like the harshness of life. And the sun dancers sacrifice so that all those good things can come back again. And that's represented by this arm or hand disappearing, but then it comes back again after the sun dance. And where the sun dance occurred is on the western edge of the Black Hills. So as you notice, it's following from Aries, we're now moving toward Taurus. And so where we're seeing the sun going through these constellations, people on Earth are going through those same places. So first Black Elk Peak, and then Peshla, and then a place called Iankaga, and then to this place called the Devil's Tower, but the original name is Matotipila. And approximately at the summer solstice, the people would arrive at this place, and they'd have a big sun dance, and the people would make their sacrifice. They'd dance for 4 days without food and water. They'd make offerings, and then after the sun dance, they would go hunt out in the Powder River country. They'd hunt for bison. They'd collect choke cherries, and they'd make the stores of their winter foods after having done all the ceremonial commitments. So again, people are traveling across the Black Hills, and now we're here, Pollux and Castor, the constellation of Gemini, and it really looks like the Devil's Tower. Really, it's shaped like it. By the way, Mato Tipila means the bear's lodge. And there's a story about the bear chased a young boy and girl. They were out playing and this gigantic bear showed up and they ran and this bear was going to tear them apart. And so they said a prayer and the earth rose up to protect them. And the angry bear trying to get to them left his claw marks on the side of that mountain. But something else happens in a spiritual way. The Devil's Tower, or Mato Tipila, and Bear Butte, and Iankaga form a giant buffalo skull. So this whole area becomes like an altar. And the names of the sites change so that the Te Hehi and Te Pute Yahe and Te He Sapa. So the black buffalo horn, the buffalo nose, and the brown or gray buffalo. So this is the gray or the brown buffalo horn, the gray buffalo horn, and the buffalo's nose. So all of those sites in the Black Hills become part of the altar of the Sundance. And this is a slide that I got from the Sinte Gleshka College. So that was the time of the Sundance. And the Sundance, as people know, people pierce their skin and so on. But the true meaning of the Sundance, people don't, they think it's like a warrior test and test of manhood and so on. But it's something much, much different. And women's Sundance as well as men, it's a sacrifice so all life can continue. And this tree, the cottonwood, is at the center of the Sundance. If you cut the cottonwood tree down, you'll see there's a star in the middle. And the star is Wichakpi. So the name of a star, what they call a star, is Wichakpi. It means the flesh of men. That's the meaning of it. And it's just like when Carl Sagan said, "We are star stuff," that's what it means. Like the stars that are out there, that's us. That's what we come from, that's what we are. So the word for the star means human flesh. There's this symbol that two-dimensionally looks like a diamond, and it's found on a lot of these parfleches, which is kind of like an Indian suitcase. It's folded rawhide that's painted, and people would store articles of clothing and so on inside of it. But actually, it's like two cones together. And in the Sundance, that represents the blessings coming down from the Wakinyan Yate and the prayers of the Sundancers going up. So it's two forces meeting. And actually, the Lakota, that was their home. They lived within that understanding and that physical shape. They actually lived inside of that, because this is the teepee. Teepee just means the home of the people. And and that's the meaning of the teepee. It's a star. A few more things I wanted to mention, but don't have a lot of time to go into, but they are here on this map, is Kea and Agleshka. Kea is the turtle, and Agleshka is a salamander. And when a baby was born, they would take the umbilical cord when it fell off, and they wouldn't just throw it away, but they'd put it inside a little beaded pouch that looked like either a turtle or a salamander, and they would keep it. And it's a protection. It represents that we came from the spirit world, and it's part of our connection with the spirit world, and also a part of like an infant's or a child's connection with its mother. So it's for protection. Kea, the turtle, has a power of endurance. It's strong, and it doesn't die easily. And Agleshka is adaptable. So I believe that the female, like a girl's umbilical cord, would go in the turtle, Kea, and the boy in Agleshka, the salamander. Some of the other constellations are this, Zuzecha, which is down here. Zuzecha is a snake, and it's thought that it possibly was connected with the Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is part of the eastern edge of the Lakota or Lakota Dakota territory. And there's also this one that is the Cygnus the Swan, approximately, which is Wakinyan, the thunder beings. So part of the spiritual aspect that I was just talking about the stars, there's these three terms. Wichasha Yuha means the man carriers. And that is this, another constellation that everybody knows, the Big Dipper. And it is thought that when that girl up in the stars dug a hole looking for the prairie turnips, she was digging somewhere in this vicinity here. And so there's an opening within those four stars, and the spirits of a child coming to Earth comes from the universe through that spot. And it's Toween, the blue woman, who brings that spirit to the Earth. And at the end of the life, escorts the spirit back to the sky. And then this, Ampo Wichakpi, which I do believe is right there. Is that correct, Andrea? The North Star. Yeah. And it's no, actually, I got the wrong term there. That is the star that never moves, and that is over here. That's yeah, Wichakpi Owangjila, and the Ampo Wichakpi is the morning star, and the morning star is actually, as we know, a planet, Venus typically. Sometimes other planets are the morning star, but the morning star has a kind of sad and beautiful meaning. Black Elk said often said that people who would get up in the morning before the sun and see the morning star, that they would grow old with wisdom. And then also, the morning star, after a Lakota dies, they sit with the body for 3 days, and on the third night, they sing a song to this star to come for the spirit of that person. So it's connected with funerals and the afterlife. And Tachanku Wanagi means the path of the spirits. So this is the Milky Way, and it's said that spirits of the departed will follow this path, and where they go is south. So Black Elk also described how when you talk about the four directions, the west, the north, the east, the south is sort of the culmination, and it means my teacher Sam said, like, the south means if you live your life in a good way, and if you follow some kind of spiritual path, or like whatever you do that is kind of, as the Buddhists would say, would generating merit, or some sort of goodness, that stays. And in the future, someone may come along, some young person, and they may discover that. Or maybe you know how to doctor people with plants, or you know songs, or you have some kind of intellectual gifts. Those things remain behind, and the spirit goes on to the south. So this is the last slide, and this is a quote from Chief Red Cloud, who made a lot of concessions when he signed a lot of treaties, but what he intended is that Native people, children, they'd learn some of the white man's things like math and science and so on, and that maybe we would learn some things about respect for the earth, respect for animals and nature, and having reverence for the world. And that's sort of an unfulfilled promise. But I like to put this at the end of this presentation in the hopes that we may yet make good on our commitments to Native American people, and that we might also be able to benefit from what they've offered to us, and that is a deeper understanding of how to live Lakol Wichoa in peace with everything. Thank you. Do we have time for any questions, or does anyone have any questions? Maybe I said everything. Yeah.
Stories still being shared and taught, or
Yes.
what is life like, for Lakota?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've written some things about this. I've given some talks like this. I'm always careful not to say were, believed, or had, but in like past tense things, because there's something genocidal about talking about a culture as if it happened and isn't happening now. An interesting thing too is like when you go to museums and you look at Native American stuff from the 19th century, and people will say like, well, Indians aren't really Indians anymore because they don't live in teepees, they don't have beaded moccasins and so on. But like, I don't carry a musket and wear a tri-corner hat either, you know what I mean? It's the cultures are dynamic, cultures change. But I would say there's definitely the parts of the culture like really valuing family, really having family being very important, having your spiritual life being important, respecting nature, and it's amazing, like Native American people serve in the military at greater numbers than any other group, like percentage-wise. There's a sense of service and honor, an incredible respect for the American flag that you see on Indian reservations, and a tremendous sense of humor, generosity. Like, if those are the marks of the culture, they're very present. And a lot of ceremonies are going on. When I first went to South Dakota in 1977, there were 1 or 2 sun dances going on. There's now sun dances all over. And maybe a few people who grew up in a really traditional family, when they became a certain age, they might go out and do a fast or vision quest. Everybody does that. And a lot of non-natives come and do that now. So that part of the culture has definitely grown over the last 40 years. And so I feel the core values are very much still there, even though they may be manifesting in 21st century ways. Like I say, I have a lot of Lakota friends that I see on Facebook every day. So, any other questions or thoughts?
What was the original borders of Lakota Nation?
It basically spanned most of North and South Dakota, eastern Montana, Wyoming, and northeastern Colorado. And basically it's marked by rivers, but that's Lakota. But then there's also Dakota and Nakota, and the Dakota, which are the eastern related tribes, they span all the way into Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, into Minnesota, and up into Canada. So basically it's the Siouan language group, and it was one of the larger Native American groups in the 19th century, and one of the most persistent groups, even though there was more military contact with these tribes, and more suppression because of how hard they fought for their independence. And yet there's something about their culture that has really, really persisted. People from other tribes all over North America have gone to South Dakota because of how much the tradition persists there. Yes?
So you mentioned that this is pretty recent stuff, getting this down on paper, in the books.
Yeah.
For the Lakota, has that driven asking other tribes, or I mean the star history of other tribes in America?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that.
It was very hard for us to find anybody with a written description of Lakota Star Knowledge or any star knowledge. We talked to probably 6 or 7 different tribes around Colorado, and everybody has oral history, oral tradition. You talk to several different medicine men, and you get different stories. So we were very happy that Jim introduced us to Lakota in Mission, South Dakota, in the Rosebud Reservation, that had this all documented. So then we felt okay to put that in here and to teach that.
Anything else? Well, the last thing I want to say is a Lakota phrase. Chante washte aglapo. Go home with a good heart. Chante washte aglapo. Thank you.